state your name and your preferred title?
Yeah, my name is Priya and I'm a professor of pediatrics, Division Chief Medical Genetics, Duke University Medical Center.
Thank you. All right, so for the subsequent questions, just look at me. So let's start off with some sort of history. How did you get involved in Pompe research?
Pompe disease has been an area of expertise for individuals at Duke University Medical Center for at least the last 3 decades. My mentor, Dr. Chen, started a lot of work in the area of Pompe disease since a long time. And I was a fellow in 1991 when work on Pompe disease really picked up greatly. At this time, we had lost a baby to Pompe disease quite recently. And after returning from the funeral of this baby, Dr. Chen and his fellow at that time, in addition to myself, Dr. Johan van Hove, made a decision that this was not going to repeat itself. So putting it in perspective, until 2006 there was no treatment for Pompe disease. This is a rare neuromuscular condition with babies typically diagnosed within the first few months of life. It affects the heart muscle and the skeletal muscle. Babies with Pompe disease are extremely floppy. The heart muscle thickens dramatically, very rapidly, and these babies die within the first year of life. The cause for death is usually what we say cardiorespiratory failure. After the death of this last baby with Pompe disease, close to 1991, Dr. Chen had decided that we would not allow this to repeat itself, and that's when the quest for a treatment began. It was an odyssey of over 15 years, and ultimately what we call a bench-to-bedside story that occurred in developing a treatment for Pompe disease, which is now commercially called Myozyme. When this work started, it was trying to provide the missing enzyme, which is L-glucosidase alpha or acid alpha glucosidase, to an individual with Pompe disease. So if you think about it, it's like giving insulin to a patient with diabetes. This enzyme that's missing in Pompe disease is what was developed at Duke and very largely at the GCRC, which we now call the DCRU, or the Duke Clinical Research Unit.
Okay, what's the prevalence of Pompe?
The prevalence of Pompe disease, I think, is really unknown. It is a rare genetic disorder, but until we have newborn screening for a condition like Pompe disease, the true prevalence of the condition is not known. There have been newborn screening studies initiated in Taiwan, and there, for the infantile form of the disease, it's now thought to be at least 1 in 33,000 births. Overall, we think that for infantile Pompe disease, the prevalence is anywhere from 1 in 50,000 to 1 in 100,000. But I think these numbers can only be accurately determined when we have newborn screening for Pompe disease.
Okay, and can you elaborate on the mechanism of Myozyme? Like you already mentioned, it kind of provides that missing enzyme, which I would assume is what causes, or what leads to all the symptoms that you just described.
Right. So Pompe disease is caused by deficiency of the enzyme called acid alpha glucosidase. And in babies with Pompe disease, there is almost no residual enzyme. And the condition is a spectrum. And so the more the residual enzyme, the later the onset of symptoms. So for the infantile form, the babies have, as I said, practically no residual enzyme. Myozyme is providing the missing enzyme. So it's a recombinant protein, which is providing what the body doesn't make endogenously or on its own. So in some ways, it's like a patient with diabetes doesn't have insulin, and so you provide insulin to the patient. myozyme in very many ways is similar. It's providing the missing protein to the body.
Are there, is this the only existing treatment right now, or are there other, treatment alternatives out there? Kind of like a Me Too, or is it still under patent?
Pompe disease is a rare genetic disease. Until 2006, there was no treatment other than symptomatic care for individuals with Pompe disease. These have not really changed the lifespan of babies or adults with the disease. I think it just provided improved quality of life, but the endpoint was still the same, that is death for the infants and significant morbidity and early mortality in adults with Pompe disease. Myozyme is the only FDA-approved treatment for Pompe disease.
Okay, so because it's such a rare disease, nobody's really interested in developing. It's kind of like an orphan drug, or orphan.
Yes, Pompe disease belongs in the category of ultra-orphan diseases, where the total number of cases is estimated to be less than 10,000 globally.
Okay, so let's talk about the process of developing this drug. If you can tell me that story from the time you got involved to the actual development, like forming that relationship with the GCRC, and how did that relationship with the GCRC come about, and how did it support you in your quest to get this drug out to the patient?
Your odyssey.
Yeah.
The work with Pompe disease began at Duke almost 2 decades ago. It started first, what we call at the bench, with trying to develop the missing enzyme. So the first work was done in what we call in vitro studies in fibroblasts or skin fibroblasts from individuals. The next step is then doing the toxicity and the safety studies and doing it in a preclinical model or in an animal model of the condition. What was available at the time was quail birds, which were flown in from Japan, who had Pompe disease, and the myozyme or the missing enzyme for these quail birds was provided to them. And after a few injections, it was discovered that these birds were able to actually fly. So the proof of concept that enzyme replacement therapy for Pompe disease began when we had this first success with the quail birds. This work was really done by Dr. Chen and his group, translating it from the bench to the first preclinical study or the first study in an animal model. After this, the discussions were had with the FDA to start the first human clinical trials with individuals with Pompe disease. A decision was made to do it in babies for several reasons. The most important being that it was lethal in babies who would typically die within the first year of life. And second was really how much enzyme could we make to allow for a treatment trial to begin. So the pilot study started at Duke at the GCRC with 3 babies with infantile Pompe disease. Without the support from GCRC, I don't know how we would have proceeded. Families, given the rarity of this condition, families came in from different parts of the country and stayed here for 6 months to a year. Many of the babies, actually the 3 babies were inpatients for the first several months at the GCRC. We really didn't know what to expect. All we knew is that without a treatment, these babies die. However, there were a lot of unknowns in terms of safety when giving the recombinant enzyme, which is now called myozyme. The support that was provided by the nursing staff and other staff at the GCRC, allowing these families to make this home away from home, allowing the support to the other family members, which included the parents, children, extended family, to make this a comfortable situation given the multiple unknowns the most important being, will the baby even make it? GCRC really provided the support to us. So our involvement was in identifying these babies and having them come to the GCRC, and then providing the enzyme, which was of course then a phase 1 clinical trial. All this work started at the GCRC. As we got the proof of concept, when one of these 3 babies started to show dramatic improvement, this baby ultimately walked and is today 12 years old. He's in school, plays baseball, he's an intelligent young man. The other 2 babies did not do as well. They initially responded to the therapy, but subsequently developed an immune response or antibodies to the administered protein. So after an initial improvement, they started to decline. And once again, there was a lot of support provided by the GCRC as we uncovered the unknown. Why were these babies initially responding and then not doing well? The identification of the making of antibodies to the administered enzyme as a cause was once again because of all the support provided by the GCRC. So when I say support, it was not just nursing support and personnel, it was even laboratory support, of processing the samples and allowing all the work to be done in with good clinical practice was all feasible.
Sure.
So you worked a lot with the young children, which is often a very emotional, high psychological stress situation. And from what you just said, you had successes and you had some failures. Can you talk a little bit about the emotional roller coaster, what it was like to have that kind of success and also to have that kind of failure along the way?
So I'm going to start as a full sentence, right?
Sure.
So infantile Pompe disease is lethal. The children are typically diagnosed within the first few months, but often the diagnosis is at 5 to 6 months of age. They end up on a ventilator by about 7 months of age, and they are deceased before their first birthday. Thus, there's a very short window of time from diagnosis to any kind of treatment intervention, not only to halt the progression, but actually to reverse the rapidly progressing pathology in Pompe disease. Clearly, when we embarked on the clinical trial at the GCRC for Pompe disease, it was a real emotional roller coaster. A lot of unknown, a lot of anxiety on the part of not only the families, but also all of us, because we were now administering a new drug, a first ever in human, in these very vulnerable babies. There was a lot of excitement when the first infusion was given. It was safe, well tolerated, and baby John, as we remember him as patient 101, received it. I remember all of us gathered together. We had a photograph taken at the GCRC with the nursing staff because it was clearly a historic moment. And at the time we used to do the IV injections or infusions every twice a week. And so baby John used to get it twice a week, and it used to be I think over a period of 3 to 4 hours that he got the infusion. And there was a lot of monitoring that occurred in terms of safety laboratories, but also in terms of assessments, repeated EKGs, repeated echocardiograms. The physical therapist used to stop by to see, how the baby was doing, etc. So, as I said earlier, a lot of excitement as the first 3 babies who were enrolled started to do well, and then a lot of worries as we felt that the first 2 babies, after an initial improvement, were now showing signs of what we thought was a plateau. They were not gaining milestones as we would have liked for them to have developed, or what a typically developing child would. But clearly there was no frank signs of a failure at the time. That's when our 3rd baby was enrolled, and also started to show initial motor response, and we were nervous how this third baby would do. So our first two babies, after showing the plateau, we recognized it was due to antibodies that they were making to the infused enzyme, which is now called myozyme. And so there was a lot of nervousness. Is this what would also happen with our third patient, who was now enrolled in the protocol? So when you ask about, or when I think about it, yes, it was a real emotional roller coaster, a lot of excitement one day, a lot of nervousness the second day, and a lot of disappointment the third day. All we knew as a team was we had to move along. We had to learn quickly and make changes quickly in order to save these three babies that were enrolled in the protocol. Another emotional aspect was there were other babies that were being identified. We didn't have enough enzyme to really treat more than the first three that we had enrolled. And so there was that sadness that we felt in the negative responses we had to give to families that were approaching us now as word about a new hope was being publicized or being made known in the Pompeii community. We had phone calls from the government, from the Prince of Belgium, or there was all kinds of pressures that were being put on us as we were embarking on this study.
Prince of Belgium.
It was the princess or someone, I don't know who it was, but it was crazy. It was crazy. Yeah, we had Ted Kennedy call, and yeah, it was nuts. Yeah.
I remember reading the story, and I don't know if this was the one that involved baby John. I remember the story about two families who kind of became friends.
Yes,
in the process.
yes,
Can you
yes.
tell me, is that the same, or is that a different?
Yes, it's the same
It's
as the
same,
first
where
two.
their baby didn't
Died,
make it,
yes.
and one their
Yeah.
baby made it. It was heartbreaking.
And they are still good friends. We still meet with them regularly. They come to Duke regularly. And it's hard when you see one with an empty nest and one with, a
So
thriving
this is the
child.
boy who's now playing baseball. and-
Yes, Kelly. Jason Kelly is the family, yeah.
Okay.
So I'm not sure if it was Prince of Belgium or Princess of Belgium. So do you want me to take that, or you can clip that off?
Yeah.
I mean, Prince or Princess, it says.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, well, and this is just me, just curious. When you say the baby is floppy,
Mhm.
like, is it their like movements? What do you mean by that?
A floppy baby, let me restart. The definition of a floppy baby is, as it sounds, a baby who's really unable to move much at all. It's almost, if you read the old literature, it's described as ragdoll appearance. So really no control over neck movements, minimal control of the arms or the extremities. They often lie in a frog-like position with the lower extremities completely splayed, unable to move. And often it's just minimal movements of the distal parts of their hands and their feet.
Okay.
And all you see is very bright eyes and a look of "help me."
Can you say something about the importance of a resource like the DCRU to researchers, who have this idea or this new compound and trying to push it forward?
The importance of the GCRC, which is now the DCRU, cannot be underestimated. When one embarks on trying to develop a new treatment, and you're trying to do new studies, what we call first-in-human studies, often the biggest roadblock, after, of course, getting permission from the authorities to perform these studies, is the cost factor, and how do you really take it from the bench to the bedside. One can have a vision and a dream and a very good product, but without the resources, it's very hard to move forward. GCRC, or the DCRU as we know it today, provides the resources, from a financial perspective, but also from an experience perspective of staff that are capable, that have done this before, and can help the investigator along the way. Without the resources of the DCRU, I don't think Myozyme would have been a reality today. We really didn't have the funding sources, and people often talk about startup companies and biotech companies interested, but very often they do want to see some proof of concept before they take the product along, and that's where resources like the DCRU are really critical to making these stories occur, making these dreams a reality, of finding new treatments for lethal conditions, for rare genetic conditions, or treatments even for less rare conditions. One really needs this kind of resource.
Okay, and this is, I remember reading an interview of yours before about that movie with Harrison Ford, that was kind of loosely based on, kind of from the perspective of the parent. So how accurate is that movie?
The movie Extraordinary Measures is a tribute to people with Pompe disease. I applaud the making of this movie because it gave a lot of exposure to increased awareness of a rare genetic disorder like Pompe disease. The movie is based off a book called The Cure, which I think provides a lot of the details of Duke's involvement in the development of a treatment for Pompe disease. The movie reflects more on the life of two siblings with the disease and the father's quest to find a treatment or a cure for his children. So it's got a lot of Hollywood components to it, but in essence, the bottom line is true that it required a lot of efforts and a lot of collaboration and partnership from patients, advocacy groups, academia, and industry to make a success happen.
One thing I noticed, because you just said that with Pompe, usually by year one, you're gone. One thing I noticed in the movies, the kids were older. So.
Pompe disease is a spectrum in terms of disease severity. At one end of the spectrum is infants with the condition who have minimal to no residual enzyme activity, acid alpha glucosidase. These babies die within the first year of life. At the other end of the spectrum are adults with the disease who may present as late as the 5th or the 6th decade of life, and then there's everything in between, with babies who present within the first year of life but live maybe for a few years. They ultimately die of cardiac involvement and respiratory failure. Then there are some infants who present in the first year of life without the cardiac involvement. So this is all because of variability of the underlying genetic mutations and of course factors, genetic modifiers as we call them, environmental factors, which may allow for the spectrum to be as broad as it is.
So what's the prognosis for Pompe now? How has it changed your patients' lives?
The prognosis for Pompe disease has dramatically changed. I think we're rewriting textbooks and book chapters and information on the condition. We've changed it from being a lethal disease to now one where there is a treatment. Many babies are now living. We have several children who are 8 years of age and older. Of them, several are going to school, walking, taking their first steps. For the younger ones, celebrating their first birthday, milestones which would not have been achieved without a treatment for Pompe disease. Do I say that we have a cure for Pompe disease? No. I think we've got a very good treatment, but there are many unanswered questions yet. There is a subset of children who do not do as well. They show an initial improvement and then decline. One of the reasons could be because of their underlying genetic mutations, where they mount what we call an immune response to the administered protein myozyme. I think there are many, many other factors which we are uncovering. Another important one is the age at which you start treatment. If you start someone in a very advanced stage of the disease, I think you can prolong life, but can you reverse the myopathy and have those children walk? I think that's difficult. So this brings about the point of newborn screening for Pompe disease, which I think would be the next phase of trying to improve outcomes with the existing treatment that we have today. As far as adults go, with the condition, there are many who have an improved quality of life. They have the ability of simple things like walking steps independently, lifting grocery bags, preparing a meal at home, being able to provide a hug to a family member, things which were not feasible because of progressive muscle weakness that they had. Another area of improvement that we've seen is ability to come off the ventilator and to be able to breathe more independently and more freely than before. So these are benefits that we are seeing in the adults. I think as individuals get diagnosed earlier, I think the outcomes will be even more dramatic.
Okay, the last question I have is, do you continue to work with the DCRU now? Are you still working with them, looking what else on your Pompe research? Because you said there are other things you're trying to look into, these genetic factors. Is the collaboration ongoing?
The collaboration with DCRU for me has been since I started at Duke. My career started at the GCRC or the DCRU now. So I've been working with the DCRU for the past 20 years. Our work with Pompe disease continues. One area is what is the appropriate dose of the enzyme that we need to administer to children or adults. So we've participated in a dosing study which was also done at the DCRU. Another area that we've worked on with the DCRU is looking at ways to suppress the immune response or to prevent the immune response in individuals with Pompe disease. This is ongoing work that is currently going on at the DCRU. We're also working with the DCRU on individuals with Pompe disease who develop a reaction to the drug. So the question is, how do we provide this drug to them safely? We've worked with nurses at the DCRU in coming up with what we call is a desensitization protocol. So we provide the enzyme at a slower rate and administer it over time safely to patients who would not have been able to do it otherwise. There are also plans for other therapies for Pompe disease, such as what we call oral medication or a small molecule, which is a substrate inhibitor. We are starting this work soon, and of course this will also be done at the DCRU. There are also second generation enzyme therapies for Pompe disease which are in development, and of course we will be using the DCRU for those also.
Myozyme is an infusion. It's an infusion that, and it takes a few hours, right?
Myozyme is an IV infusion given to individuals with Pompe disease. It takes close to 4 hours to complete the infusion. It's administered every 2 weeks intravenously.
So you work with populations, like you said, these orphan, super ultra orphan populations of people with diseases that have really no cure, coming up to the point where you've started working with them. They have previously have had no cure. When you start working with these people, you are providing them with a cure that is something that they've never had before, an opportunity to live their lives and to even have their children live all together. What is it like to provide that miracle cure to somebody? And I know all medicine, that's like, that's like the goal is to cure somebody ultimately, take away their disease. This is, you have an opportunity to actually do that. Is that very fulfilling for you? What does that feel like when you can say, I can
I did
I can,
this,
I
yeah.
can take away your disease, and here's the cure.
Of dealing with families or with children like Pompe disease is a very humbling experience. It really allows you to refocus and think of all the good that we all have. We're healthy, we're able to do things. It's a reflection of how fortunate we are, but it also gives us an opportunity to go back and make a difference. Living or working with families with Pompe disease has honestly been a humbling experience. It has been my privilege and my honor to have the opportunity to work with families with rare, devastating, lethal genetic conditions. The trust that they put in you is remarkable. It only makes us realize how much we owe these families a commitment to develop these treatments for them, and it's what brings me to work every day. And the team that we've established at Duke, we started out with a few of us. I think now it's a growing group of individuals of close to 50 or 60 working on Pompe disease at Duke University. We have collaborators now globally. I think it's paved the path for us now trying to find treatments for other rare genetic diseases. We've used the DCRU for Pompe as a start, but we've continued to use the DCRU for other rare genetic diseases where either we're trying to develop a new treatment, try a new treatment, or improve upon an existing treatment. So for conditions like Gaucher disease, Fabry disease, alkaline hypophosphatasia, we have used the DCRU. And I have to say, without the resources that we have at the DCRU, it would be hard to do some of these studies.
One more last question.
Did I answer that
Yeah,
appropriately? I don't know what I said. I just said something.
Yeah, I mean, this is a very emotional thing. Obviously, it's hard to encapsulate years and years and years of
Yeah.
treatment with people. Where do you see the future? Where's 10 years from now with Pompe disease? Where do you see this going? Do you see it going away? Do you see improvements in the therapy? What happens 5, 10, 15 years from now?
The development of Myozyme as a treatment for Pompe disease, I look at as a first-generation treatment. It's a life-saving treatment, but it's not the ultimate cure. There will be refinements over the next decade in terms of newer generation of enzyme therapies, different approaches like preventing the accumulation of the material that builds up in Pompe disease, which is glycogen, what we call substrate inhibition, and ultimately what I hope is gene replacement therapy for Pompe disease. Another area that I see over the next decade is newborn screening for Pompe disease. Clearly, a diagnosis which is made one day later than it should have is one day too late for these children. In a condition that's as rapidly progressive as Pompe disease, making a diagnosis in the newborn period and the outcome that we could have, I think, is dramatically different than even diagnosing a child at 1 month or 2 months of age. This has become very apparent from the results from the Taiwan newborn screening program for Pompe disease. Babies who've been now picked up via this program are doing much better than the ones who are picked up clinically as we're doing today in many parts of the US.
Thank you. Is there anything you'd like to add?
No, unless you think some parts were not right, I don't know.
No, that's great. I wanted, you mentioned the DCRU a lot, which is great.
That's what you wanted, right?
Yeah, because we wanted to market kind of.
Sure. So you'll just take snippets of this or something?
Yes, we will. But we're yeah, that's in the next question.